The first call came from a street I knew was not on the map, not missing, not renamed, not marked wrong. It simply did not exist. But the system still gave me a caller location. House number 14, Farron Row. A woman said someone was standing in her yard and she wanted an officer to come by. So I sent one. He drove to the exact corner where her street was supposed to be and found only a brick wall. The woman was still on the line, the officer was still at the wall, and somehow I was the only person listening to both sides of a street the city had sealed away. The calls come in on the recorded line, which means there is a voice and a timestamp and a caller location that the system pulls automatically from the tower and the address grid. And for 11 months I have been listening to people phone the police from a street that the city says does not exist and never did. I am a dispatcher. I have been one for 19 years. I am telling you this in the order I understood it, which is not the order it happened, because the thing about this street is that it does not care what order anything happens in, and I have had to learn to hold the pieces still by force. If I tell it out of sequence, you will hear it the way I lived it, which was as a slow accumulation of small wrongnesses, none of them enough on its own to make a sane person act, all of them together enough to unmake one. That is how these things work, I have come to believe. Not a door flung open. A draft under a door you did not know was there, felt first as only a coolness at the ankles, ignored for months, until one night you follow it to its source and find the door, and find it already ajar, and find that you are the one who has been opening it, a hair's width the night, with your own patient hand. I work the overnight desk at the Communications Center for the West District, which is a windowless room on the second floor of a building that also holds the impound lot and the property clerk. In a real and ordinary city with real and ordinary problems, a city of 600,000 people, where on any given night I will take calls about a bar fight, a stalled car, a woman who cannot wake her husband, a smoke alarm, a raccoon in a kitchen. I want you to understand the texture of the job, because the texture is what makes the anomaly visible, the way a single wrong note is only wrong because of all the right ones around it. Dispatch is pattern. You sit in the hum of the room with the headset on and the screen in front of you, and the whole city laid out as a map of streets and address ranges. And the calls come in, and you place them. You place each one on the grid. You send the nearest unit. You log it. You move to the next. There is a particular calm to it that people outside the work never believe is real. The calls are other people's worst nights, and your job is to be the one steady thing in them, the flat voice that does not rise, that asks the address again, that says help is coming. And you learn to hold that flatness even when the caller is screaming, because your flatness is the only floor under their panic. After 19 years, the grid is not a map to me anymore. It is a body. I know it the way you know the inside of your own mouth with your tongue. I know which address ranges belong to which beats, which corners generate which kinds of trouble on which nights of the week, the way the Friday calls cluster along the entertainment strip, and the Sunday calls scatter out into the residential grid like a tide going out. And that is why on a Tuesday in the spring, when a call landed on a street I did not know, I noticed it the way you notice a tooth that was not there yesterday. The tongue goes to it before the mind does. Something in the shape of the grid was suddenly wrong, and my attention snagged on it before I had any idea why. The street was called Farron Row. The caller was a woman, calm, a little tired, the way people are at 2 a.m, and she said there was someone in the yard behind her house, and she would like an officer to come by. Routine. The lowest tier of call, the kind that resolves 9 times out of 10 into a cat, a branch, a neighbor's teenager cutting through. I pulled her location, and the system put her on Farron Row, house number 14, and I went to assign the nearest patrol unit, and the assignment field would not populate, because to assign a unit, the system cross-references the address against the patrol grid, and Farron Row was not in the patrol grid. It was on the caller location readout, pulled live from the tower, sitting right there in the field where the address always sits, and it was not on the map I dispatched from. I typed it into the address search. No results. I typed it into the mapping layer the whole department runs on. the same one the county uses, the same one the mapping companies license and update, the authoritative one, the one that is right when everything else is wrong. No Varon Row, not in this city, not in this county, not anywhere the search could reach. I widened the search to the whole region on a hunch that she had been routed to us in error from somewhere far off. Nothing. There is no Varon Row anywhere the system can see. I did what you do. I did not tell her any of this, because you never tell a caller the system has lost them. It does nothing but frighten a frightened person further. I told her I was having trouble locating her address. Could she give me a cross street? She gave me one, Haldane Avenue, which is a real street, a long arterial road I know well, 4 lanes of it running east to west across the whole district, and she said Varon Row runs off Haldane just past the laundrette. And I knew that stretch of Haldane. I had sent units to it 100 times, to the all-night laundrette that gets the occasional vagrancy call, to the body shop that got broken into twice last winter. I had, in my mind's map, walked that stretch more times than I could count. There is no street off it past the laundrette. There is the laundrette, and then a body shop, and then the on-ramp for the ring road. There is no room between them for a street. The buildings share a wall. But she was calm and certain, and a little impatient now, the way real callers get when the operators seem slow, and there was a dog barking behind her voice, a real dog, close, and a television murmuring somewhere deeper in her house, and the particular resonance of a voice in a small tiled kitchen, and all the small, true sounds of a real home at 2 in the morning. And I could not tell her she was calling from a place that did not exist. So I told her I would get someone out to her as soon as I could, and I flagged the call for a supervisor, and I moved to the next one, because the calls do not wait. That is the first law of the room. Whatever is in front of you, there is always a next one, and it is already ringing. I want to be honest about what I thought that first night, because the slowness of my understanding is the whole story, and if I let you think I saw it coming, I will have lied to you. I thought it was a glitch. Addresses do occasionally come through wrong, mangled by a bad tower handoff, a phone with a spoofed or scrambled location, a data entry ghost from years back that never got scrubbed. I thought Varon Row was a corruption of some real street name, Vern Street, or Warren Road, or Farron Close, and that the woman was somewhere real and the system had simply garbled where. I even had a theory that she was one of those callers who gives you the name of the street she grew up on, or the street from a dream, disoriented, half asleep, and that the real street she was standing on was one door over from whatever her mouth said. I noted it, and I let it go, and if it had happened only once, I would have let it go forever, and I would be a different and better rested person than I am now, a person who still believes the map is the last word on what exists. It happened again 11 days later. A different voice, a man this time older, reporting a smell of gas in his kitchen. Location: Varon Row, house number 9, same as before, the address alive on the readout, nothing in the grid, nothing in any map. And this time, because the first one had left a burr under my skin, a splinter I kept touching without meaning to, I did more than flag it. I stayed on the line with him. I kept him talking while I searched, because a gas call is a real emergency, glitch or not, and if there was any chance a man was standing in a kitchen, slowly filling with gas, I was going to find him if I had to search every street in the county by hand. I asked him for landmarks. I asked him to describe what he could see out his front window, and he described his street to me in the patient, slightly baffled way of a person who cannot understand why the operator does not simply know where he lives, the way you would sound if a stranger phoned you and could not find your city on a map. He said Varon Row was a short street, 11 houses, brick, built between the wars, with plane trees down both sides that dropped their seed balls all over the pavement in autumn, and a pillar box on the corner where it met Haldane, the old cast-iron kind, and a laundrette across the way whose sign buzzed at night. He said his was the blue door, third along on the left. He said the coal hole covers were still in the pavement outside each house, though no one had taken coal in 50 years, and that his grandchildren used to jump from one to the next. He said, and this is the thing I wrote down verbatim and have kept and can still see in my own handwriting, "It's the same as it's always been, love. It's not gone anywhere." And behind him again, the true sounds. A kettle coming up to the boil, a floorboard, the low weather of an ordinary life going on. I sent a unit to Haldane. I want to be clear that I did this on my own authority and slightly outside procedure because there was no valid address to attach the dispatch to. And a dispatch without a valid address is the sort of thing that gets flagged in an audit. But I told the officer, a patient veteran named Okafor, who has worked the overnight beat with me for the better part of a decade and who does not spook, to drive the stretch of Haldane past the laundrette and look for a short brick street with plane trees and a pillar box on the corner. I framed it as a welfare check on a possible gas leak, which was true. He drove it twice. I heard the engine note change over the radio as he slowed. He got out and walked it, and I heard his footsteps and his breathing and the 4 lanes of Haldane going by. He stood, he told me over the radio, at the exact point between the laundrette and the body shop where the caller said Varon Row met Haldane. And there was a brick wall there, the blank side wall of the body shop, running straight from the laundrette to the body shop's frontage with not a hand's breadth between them and no street, no gap, no plane trees, no pillar box, no blue door. He rapped his knuckles on the wall for me over the radio so I could hear it was solid, and I heard it, the flat, dull knock of a man's knuckles on old brick, and while he did it, the man on the phone was still talking to me, still smelling gas in his kitchen on Varon Row, still giving me his blue door and his 11 houses and his plane trees, and Okafor was standing on the very spot the man's house should have occupied, and finding a wall, and the two of them, the caller and the officer, were at the same place at the same moment, and one of them was in a street and one of them was at a wall, and I was the only person alive who was listening to both at once. I have thought about that a great deal since, that I was the seam, that the wrongness passed through me because I was the only point where the two versions of that corner were connected, my headset a wire strung between a street and a wall. The gas call resolved itself. That is to say, the man said after a while, "Oh, it's stopped, the smell's gone, must have been the pilot light on the boiler playing up. Thank you, love, sorry to trouble you at this hour." And he hung up, content, a man whose small emergency had passed, and I sat in the humming room with the headset warm on my ears and understood that I had a problem that was not a glitch, because a glitch does not have plane trees and a glitch does not drop seed balls on the pavement in autumn. And a glitch does not say it's the same as it's always been, thank you, love. A glitch is empty. This was full. This had a whole life pressing through it. I did the sensible next thing, the thing my training pushed me toward, which was to pull the records. If Varon Row had never existed, that would be one kind of problem. A haunting kind, a where are these calls coming from kind, the kind with no floor under it. But if Varon Row had existed once, that would be a different kind, a solvable kind, a records kind, and I badly wanted it to be the solvable kind, because the solvable kind lets you sleep. So over the following weeks, on my breaks, and after my shifts, in the daytime hours when I should have been sleeping, I went to the Central Library and the Land Registry and the newspaper archive, and I want to walk you through what I found, because it is where the floor of the thing dropped away under me and did not come back. Varon Row existed. It had existed. In the oldest street directory the Central Library holds, a fat foxed volume from before the war, with the city's every street and every household listed by name and occupation. There is a Varon Row, listed off Haldane Avenue, 11 households, the trade set down beside the names in the patient bureaucratic hand of a vanished clerk. A coal merchant at number 1, a seamstress, a widow living on means, a family of printers at the far end, 3 of them, father and 2 sons, all in the same trade. 11 houses, and when I counted the entries, there were 11, brick between the wars, exactly as my callers had described them to me down the line without ever having seen the book. It was on the Ordnance Survey maps of the period, and I sat in the library's map room and put my finger on it. A short stub of a street with the little paired dots, the cartographers, used to mean street trees running down both sides, branching off Haldane Avenue between two larger buildings, and the pillar box was marked too. The tiny letters LB for letterbox at the corner, exactly where the man at number 9 said it stood. It was real. It was as real as any street in the city, more real than most, because it was documented down to its trees and its postbox and the trades of the people who lived on it. And then it was gone. Not demolished in any record I could find, and I looked hard for a demolition, because a demolition would have been a comfort, a clean cause, a date I could point to and say, there, that is when, and that is why. There was no clearance order. No slum clearance scheme took it. I checked the schemes, and Varon Row is on none of their lists. No bomb damage map marks it. The district was barely touched in the war, and Varon Row not at all. No compulsory purchase, no road widening, no notice in the official gazette, which lists every such thing by law. Between one edition of the street directory and the next, a gap of only a few years, Varon Row simply stopped being listed. One edition it is there, 11 households, the printers still at the far end. The next edition, Haldane Avenue, runs from the numbers before Varon Row straight to the numbers after it with nothing in between, as though the street had never interrupted the sequence at all. And the maps followed. In the newer editions, the two larger buildings that had flanked Varon Row had grown together, the way a healed cut closes, and where the short street with its paired dots had been there was now continuous frontage, a single unbroken line, and later, still, there was the laundrette and the body shop and the on-ramp, and nothing between them but a party wall. The street had not been destroyed. It had been closed over. The city had grown across the place where it was the way skin grows across a splinter, sealing it inside, and the maps had followed the skin faithfully. And after 2 or 3 editions, no map remembered that there had ever been anything under the smooth new frontage of Haldane Avenue at all. I found no death. I found only a silence that closed, and behind the silence in the earliest book, 11 households still going about their trades. I could have stopped there. A vanished street quietly absorbed by the growing city, its residents' descendants scattered, and somehow through some fault in the tower system calling from numbers that geolocated to the old sealed ground. It was almost an explanation. It had the shape of one. But it was not, and I knew it was not, because of the calls which kept coming, which are still coming, and which were never, not once, about the past. That was the fact I kept circling back to at my kitchen table in the daytime with the curtains drawn and the library photocopies spread out in front of me. If these were echoes, they would echo the old life. They would call about coal deliveries and gas mantles and the trades in the directory. They did not. They were about now. That is the thing I need you to hold on to, because it is the center of everything. The single fact that turned this from a curiosity into a thing that has cost me my sleep and nearly cost me more. The people who call me from Varon Row are not ghosts reenacting an old night on a loop. They are living their present, which is my present, tonight, this year. They call about gas leaks in modern boilers and prowlers, and a car that won't start on a cold morning, and a neighbor's party thumping through the wall, and once, terribly, a child with a fever that would not come down at 4 a.m. They know what year it is. I have asked carefully, folded into other questions, so as not to alarm them, and they tell me correctly, the current year, without hesitation. They have the same news on that I have. The man at number 9 once grumbled about a headline I had read that same evening. They complain about the same weather I am having, the same late frost, the same wet week. They are not in the past. They are in a Varon Row that is going on right now, in a city identical to mine in every respect, except that on their maps the street is there, has always been there, was never closed over, and on my maps it is a party wall between a laundrette and a body shop. They are not the residents of the old directory, grown old. They are new people, living now, in houses that on my side of things have been sealed under Haldane Avenue for the better part of a century. The street did not stop when the maps closed over it. It went on, behind the skin, keeping its own present, and its present has caught up to mine, and now it can reach my line. And here is where I made the mistake that I have to tell you about, the mistake that is the true subject of this whole account, because everything after it is the consequence of it, and because I think if you understand the mistake, you might not make it, and that is the only reason I am recording any of this. I started answering them properly, not just placating them, not just holding the line until they hung up, helping them. I could not send a unit because Okafor's wall was real and no car could drive into it, and after a few more attempts, I stopped trying, because sending Okafor to stand at a wall while a woman on Varon Row waited for help that could never physically arrive was a cruelty to both of them, to her waiting and to him standing there in the dark with his hand on the brick, feeling like a fool and worse than a fool. But I could talk. That much crossed. My voice crossed the wall even though nothing else could. I could stay on the line. I could tell the man with the gas to open his windows and turn off the supply at the meter and get everyone out of the house and not touch a light switch, and he could do those things on his side and be safe and thank me. I could talk the mother through the fever at 4 a.m, the sponging and the fluids, and how to count the breaths, and when the counting meant she should worry more. And I could hear the child's crying ease over the line, and hear her weep with the particular relief of a parent whose terror has just been given something to do with itself. And it did not matter, I told myself, that no ambulance could reach her, because my voice reached her. My voice went through the wall, even though the wall was solid to everything else. And I was still doing my job, still being the flat, steady floor under someone's worst night, even if the someone was on the sealed side of a healed-over street. For months this was almost sustainable, and I need you to understand how it felt from the inside, because from the inside it did not feel like doing something dangerous. It felt like the best of the job. It felt like the thing I had become a dispatcher for in the first place, 19 years ago, before the years wore the wanting down into routine. Varon Row gave me back the wanting. I began to know them. There is a rhythm to a dispatch beat, the same addresses generating the same troubles, and Varon Row developed its regulars the way any beat does. There was the woman at number 14, whose name was Sella, who called about prowlers in her backyard that I came to understand over many nights were mostly her loneliness given a shape she could phone about. She was a widow, I gathered, though she never said it plainly, and the someone in the yard was, more often than not, the wind in a shrub and the enormous silence of a house that had once held more than one person. There was the man at number 9, whose gas was always fine in the end, who I think called partly to have someone to talk to at 2 a.m, as I was someone to talk to at 2 a.m. The two of us awake on either side of a wall neither of us could cross, keeping each other company in the deep trough of the night. There was the printer's family at the far end of the row, 3 generations of them now, who called when the youngest had croup, and again months later when the eldest fell and could not get up, and I stayed on that call for 40 minutes until they had him settled and comfortable. And the grandmother thanked me and called me a good girl, though I am nearer 50 than 15, and I found that I was crying quietly in the humming room and did not fully know why. I knew their 11 houses. I could have drawn the street. I had never seen it. No living person on my side of the wall has seen it in 100 years. And I could have drawn it from nothing but the voices of the people who lived there and called me when they were afraid. The plane trees, the pillar box, the blue door, 3rd along on the left, the coal hole covers the children jump between, the laundrette across the way with the buzzing sign, the seam of the pavement, the color of Sella's front step. I built the street in my head out of their fear and their loneliness and their small emergencies. The way you build a face out of a voice on the phone, and the street I built was more vivid to me than half the real streets on my grid, because the real streets I only dispatched to, and Varon Row I attended to, night after night, with my whole trained attention, which is a thing I did not yet understand. I was pouring like water into a crack. I did not tell my supervisors, not really, not after the first flags went nowhere. I had flagged the earliest calls dutifully, and the flags had come back marked as data errors, tower location faults, closed with a note to monitor and escalate if the pattern continued. The pattern continued, and I did not escalate. And I want to be honest that I stopped escalating partly because I did not want anyone to take Varen Row away from me, to fix the glitch, to close the routing fault, to leave Sella calling into a dead system at 2 in the morning about prowlers that were only her fear, with no one picking up, no flat steady voice to tell her it was probably the wind, and she should lock her back door and try to sleep. I had made them mine. That was the mistake when I trace it back to its root. Not answering the calls exactly, keeping them, needing them, letting the helping become a thing I did for myself as much as for them, so that I could not have stopped even if I had understood, and I did not understand, not for a long time, what the helping was doing. The change came slowly, and I did not see it as a change at first because it disguised itself as familiarity, which is the cruelest disguise, because familiarity is exactly what you stop examining. The callers began to know things about me. Small things at first, the kind of thing you do not notice because it is folded into ordinary talk. Sella asked me one night in the middle of a prowler call whether my knee was any better, and I said, without thinking, "Oh, much better, thank you," and had hung up and taken 2 more calls before it reached me that I had said nothing to anyone, ever on any line, about my knee, which I had wrenched badly on the stairs at home a week before, at home, alone, miles from the center, a private pain in a private house that no one but me knew about. I told myself I had mentioned it, tired, in one of our long 2 in the morning talks, and forgotten. That is what you tell yourself. That is what the mind does with the first thread. It tucks it back in. The man at number 9 mentioned, offhand, the color of the mug I drink my tea from on shift, a chipped green one I have used for years, and there is no camera in the dispatch room. And there is certainly no way for a man on the sealed side of a party wall to see what I hold in my hand at 2 in the morning. And one night the printer's grandmother, warmly, in the middle of thanking me, used my daughter's name, said it the way you say the name of a child you have known since she was small, and asked after her by name. And I had never once in 19 years spoken my daughter's name on that line, or any line, because you do not bring your family into the room. It is the one wall you keep. And the grandmother said her name as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if my daughter were a child of Varen Row. I keep good logs. It is the discipline of the job, and it is the discipline of my nature. I log everything, every word I say to a caller, time-stamped in my own careful shorthand, and I went back through 11 months of logs, every syllable I had spoken to Varen Row, and I had never mentioned my knee, or my mug, or my daughter's name. They had not learned these things from me. They were learning me the way I had learned them, slowly, night by night, detail by detail, building me in their heads the way I had built their street in mine, and getting closer to the whole of me the way I had gotten closer to the whole of the row. And sitting in the humming room with the logs open and the cold coming up through the soles of my feet, I understood the thing I should have understood months before. The thing that had been under the whole arrangement from the first night. The wall was not a wall. The wall was a membrane, and it was not one way. All those months I had thought I was reaching through it to them, my voice the one thing in all the world that could cross into the sealed street, a gift I gave them out of the goodness the job had left in me. But a thing that can be reached through from both sides. I had been leaning on the membrane, pressing my voice and my attention and my care into it night after night, and I had thinned it from my side with my own steady, patient attention, and now something on the other side was pressing back, learning the shape of me the way I had learned the shape of the 11 houses, and coming closer through the place I had worn thin. And then Okafor's wall began to change, and that is when the fear stopped being a thought and became a physical thing that lived behind my breastbone and woke me in the afternoons. Okafor still drove that stretch of Haldane because he was the only other person who knew, and because he had become as caught in it as I was, in his quieter way. We did not talk about it much, but we both knew it was ours now, the 2 of us, and no one else. And one night he called me, not on the radio, but on my personal phone, which he never did, which crossed a line between us that we had never crossed, and his voice was wrong, careful, the voice of a man reporting something he does not want to be true. He said, "There's a pillar box." I asked him what he meant. He said that on the corner of Haldane, at the point between the laundrette and the body shop, where for 11 months there had been nothing but blank brick, where he had rapped his knuckles for me on that first night, there was now a pillar box. An old one, cast iron, painted the right dull red, standing on the pavement against the party wall as though it had stood there 100 years. He said the laundrette owner, when he asked, said the pillar box had always been there. Everyone knew that. It had been there since before the laundrette, since before he was born. What a strange thing to ask about. He said he had photographed that wall a dozen times over the months, documenting its blankness for us the way I documented my words in my logs, and the wall had been blank in every photograph, and now there was a pillar box, and no one but him found it strange. And when he looked back at his own old photographs on his phone, the early ones, the ones he had taken to prove the wall was blank, there was a pillar box in those too now, standing against the wall in photographs it had not been in when he took them, as though the images themselves had quietly rewritten to agree with the new corner. The street was coming back, not being remembered into existence, not being imagined. Coming back physically into my city, one detail at a time, and the world was closing ranks behind each new detail so that it had always been there, so that only Okafor and I, who had so carefully documented its absence, could still see the seam of it opening. And I understood then, all at once and far too late, the direction of the whole thing, the direction I had been feeding without knowing it, gladly, for 11 months. Varon Row was not calling out of its sealed present merely to be helped, merely to be pitied and attended to. Varon Row was calling its way back into being. A closed-over place cannot reopen on its own. The skin of the city holds. A street sealed under 100 years of frontage stays sealed. But if someone on the living side will answer, will attend, will believe, will pour 19 years of pattern-trained attention into the sealed seam night after night after night, then the attention does the work. The attention is the solvent. The calls were never the symptom of the anomaly. The calls were the method of it. Varon Row had found, in me, the one instrument capable of reopening it. A dispatcher, trained for 2 decades to take the reality of a voice on a line as absolute, to place every caller on the grid as real, to attend to strangers' emergencies as the truest thing in the room, and above all, unable, constitutionally unable, to let a frightened person ring and not pick up. It had found the one person in the city whose entire training and entire nature was a key shaped exactly to its lock. And it had called, and I had answered, and every answer had turned the key a fraction. I want to tell you I stopped the moment I understood. I did not at first, and I have to be honest about that, because it is the ugliest true thing in this account, and if I leave it out, the rest is a lie. Because by then I did not want to stop, and understanding did not change the wanting. If anything, it sharpened it. The way knowing a thing is ending makes you hold it closer. I had come to love them. The 11 houses, Sella and her prowlers, and the man at 9, and his phantom gas, and the printers with their croup and their falls, and their grandmother who called me a good girl. And I had come to need them, the way you need the thing that makes you feel useful and awake and real at 2 a.m. in a windowless room in the middle of your life. And the knowledge that answering them was bringing a dead street chewing back up through the healed frontage of my living city, that it was working open a seam the city had closed for reasons no record would give me. All of that was abstract, a pillar box on a corner, a photograph rewriting itself, while Sella's loneliness was concrete and immediate and in my ear, and I kept picking up. For 3 more weeks I kept picking up, and in those 3 weeks Okafor watched the plane trees come back, first as young saplings that everyone along Haldane swore had always grown there, then taller between 1 week and the next, faster than any tree grows, and a coal-hole cover surfaced in the pavement, iron worn smooth. And the party wall developed, at its base, a faint vertical line, the ghost of a corner, An edge beginning where no edge had been, the first hairline of a mouth opening in the frontage of Haldane Avenue, where a whole street was quietly working itself back into the world. What stopped me was Sella, on an ordinary night, in the most ordinary way, which is how the worst things arrive. She called, calm, tired, and she said there was someone in the yard behind her house, and she would like an officer to come by, which is what she always said, her little liturgy, the thing she called to say when what she meant was that the house was too quiet and the night was too long. And I started to say what I always said, the wind, the back door, try to sleep. And she interrupted me gently, the way she never had, and she said, "It's all right, love. You don't have to send anyone tonight. He's nearly here now." And a coldness went through me, and I asked her who was nearly here. And she said, warm, pleased, the settled, contented tone of a woman speaking of a guest she has been expecting for a very long time and has almost given up hoping for, "You are, love. You've been coming for months. We can nearly see you now, at the end of the row, coming up under the plane trees. Just keep talking. Just keep coming. We've kept a house for you." And I understood the last piece, the piece that turned my blood to water, which was that the direction ran both ways and had always run both ways, and that they were not the same direction at all, but the same single motion, seen from opposite sides of a thinning wall. It was not only that Varon Row was coming back into my city, it was also that I was going into Varon Row. Every night for 11 months I had reached into the row with my voice and my attention, and every night the row had reached the same distance into me, and the coming back of the street and the going in of the dispatcher were one thing, one act, one door opening from both sides at once. Sella and the man at 9 and the printers were not only being drawn up into my world, I was being drawn down into theirs, into the 11 houses and the plane trees and the pillar box and the blue door, into the place the city had closed over, which could only reopen around a living person willing to stand at the end of the row and be its way back into the world, the anchor, the root the new skin would grow from. They had kept a house for me. Third along, perhaps, behind a door I would come to know the color of. Okafor's seam at the base of the wall was not only Varon Row pushing out. It was me being drawn in, and the two were the same seam. I hung up on Sella. It was the hardest single thing I have done in 19 years on the line, harder than the calls where people die while you talk to them. Because hanging up on Sella felt exactly like abandoning a lonely widow at 2 a.m. to the silence of her too large house, which is precisely the shape of the hook, the exact and perfect shape of it, kindness bent around into a handle to lift me by. And I sat in the humming room with the deadline in my ear, and I did the only thing I could think to do, the only thing that was mine to do, which was to stop, to not pick up, not to fix it, not to solve it, not to understand it, because understanding is a kind of attention, and attention was the whole danger, simply to stop feeding it, to let it ring. The calls from Varon Row still come in. I see them land, night after night, the address alive on the readout, nothing in the grid, Sella at 14, the man at 9, the printers at the far end. And I let them ring. It is the worst thing I do in a night, worse than any real emergency, letting them ring, watching the count climb, hearing in my mind the empty house and the too long night on the far side, and knowing they are in trouble, or only lonely, or afraid. On the far side of a seam, I spent the better part of a year working open with my own patient hands, and I do not pick up. Because the picking up is the solvent. Because a closed-over street can only reopen around someone who attends to it. And if no one attends, the skin holds, the seam closes, the pillar box goes quiet against the wall, the plane trees sink back into whatever ground holds them, and the 11 houses go back down under Haldane Avenue to wherever closed-over places wait. And it is working slowly the way it works slowly in the other direction, because these things are not fast. They are patient. They move at the speed of attention, given or withdrawn. Okafor tells me the plane trees are smaller again, and then, a week later, gone. The coal hole cover is gone. The vertical seam at the base of the wall has smoothed and healed. And one night he drove past, and the pillar box was not there. And when he asked the laundrette owner about it, the man looked at him as though he were slightly unwell and said there had never been a pillar box on that corner. What a peculiar thing to keep asking. And in Okafor's old photographs the wall is blank again, blank in all of them, blank as if it had always and only ever been a wall. The city is healing back over Varon Row because we have stopped giving it the one thing it needed, and the seam is closing, and the 11 houses are sinking back under the frontage of Haldane Avenue, and Sella and the Man at 9 and the printers with their croup and their falls are sinking with them back into the sealed present they came from. And I am letting them go. I am choosing every single night to let them go, and it is the right choice, and it does not feel like one, and I do not expect it ever will. I have not worked out in all of this what Varon Row truly is, or why the city closed over it in the first place with no death and no demolition and no notice in the Gazette, or where the sealed side goes, or what precisely would have happened to me at the end of the row where they could nearly see me coming up under the trees in the house they had kept. And I have decided deliberately that I do not want to know, that I will not go looking, because wanting to know is another kind of attention, and attention is the one thing I cannot afford to spend on that street ever again. Not a single night's worth, not a single call. I know only the mechanism, the way you come to know that a wound heals if you stop picking at it, without knowing the first thing about the body underneath. And I know the cost of what I did, which was that for the better part of a year I gave a sealed, forgotten street the one thing that could bring it back and draw me in. And I gave it gladly, unknowingly, and then knowingly, because it came to me wearing the voices of frightened and lonely and ordinary people, asking for help at 2 a.m, and answering people who ask for help at 2 a.m. is the whole of what I am, the entire content of my 19 years, the shape my soul was worn into by the work. The calls still come. Fewer now, as the seam closes, but they come, and Sella's name still lands on my screen in the small hours, and the line rings in the humming room, and I sit with my hands flat on the desk, and I do not pick it up, and I count the rings under my breath until the system logs it missed. And I have started to notice on the nights I hold out longest, on the nights the ringing goes on and on before it stops, that when it finally does stop, in the half-second of silence before the next real call from a real street lands in my ear, there is a sound in my headset that is not the room and is not the deadline. It is faint, and it is far, and it is getting fainter week by week as the street goes down. A wind moving in trees I am not having on my side, or the buzz of a laundrette sign, or the small particular sound of a blue door standing open at the end of a row, waiting in a house that was kept for me. And on those nights I take off the headset and I sit in the plain, honest noise of the real room, the hum and the other dispatchers' low voices, and the traffic on the real street outside, until my hands are steady and the far sound is gone, and then I put the headset back on and I take the next real call from a real address on the living grid in the city that is mine, and I do not pick up the other one.